The Chesapeake Naval Base in Virginia was unlike any other, massive, fortified, and always alive with motion. Aircraft hummed in the distance, flags rippled in the salty breeze, and steel boots tapped a precise rhythm across the pavement. Today, however, the base buzzed with an unusual sense of anticipation. Rumors had circled all week, but now it was confirmed. President Donald J. Trump would be arriving in person. The energy across the base was electric. Officers double-checked uniforms. Maintenance crews ensured every corner of the facility gleamed. And the ceremonial lineup of enlisted personnel was assembled with surgical precision. The base had seen its share of high-ranking visits, but a presidential appearance? That was history. Among the 100-plus sailors standing in formation, Petty Officer Second Class Luke Harrison, 28, stood still, his posture textbook perfect, his gaze fixed ahead. He wore his dress whites with pride, his shoes so polished they reflected the overcast sky. But inside, Luke was anything but calm. His heart thudded against his ribs like a drumline, steady and rising. Tucked into the inside pocket of his uniform, just over his heart was a worn photograph, folded perfectly to avoid creases across the face. He hadn't looked at it today. He didn't need to. He knew every detail by heart. In the photograph, a younger Luke stood beside a man with a commanding presence, a Navy commander with a hard jawline, sun-worn skin, and the kind of eyes that had seen war and peace both. His name, Commander Nathan Harrison, his father. Luke had been 15 when that picture was taken, and barely 16 when the machines in the hospital room began to beep less frequently. Cancer, a silent war, and it won. Today wasn't just a ceremony for Luke. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about photo ops or speeches. It was about something quieter, heavier, something promised. From behind the gate, sirens sounded faintly, followed by the low rumble of engines. Heads turned. The presidential motorcade was pulling into view. 4 black SUVs, 1 modified armored limousine, and 2 Secret Service chase vehicles rolled into the base. The rumble of their approach felt like thunder against the concrete. All personnel! Attention! A voice barked. Boots snapped together. Hands rested at the side, backs straightened. The entire line became a still frame. The first door opened. Out stepped the Secret Service, scanning, murmuring into earpieces. Then the door of the limo swung open and the 45th President of the United States emerged, flanked by aides and officers. Donald Trump walked with purpose, suit pressed, tie sharp. He wore a serious expression, not performative, but present. He had been here before, but not like this. Today felt closer, more direct. He began moving down the line of sailors, pausing briefly to shake hands, nodding at officers, occasionally asking a name or a hometown. Cameras clicked from a distance. Reporters observed behind barricades. A military band played soft, patriotic melodies that wafted through the air like background dialogue. Luke felt his hands sweat despite the cool breeze. His fingers twitched slightly, his throat dry. He could feel the photo against his chest. Heavier now, like it was made of stone. He wasn't supposed to say anything. No one expected that. Just a salute, a moment, and done. But as the president moved closer, something inside Luke shifted. Trump was now just 2 officers away. 1, and then he was there. Luke raised his hand in a precise, razor-sharp salute, one he'd practiced more times than he could count. His posture was perfect, his chin steady. But as their eyes locked, Luke's heart surged. Something hot pricked at the edges of his vision. Trump returned the salute out of instinct, but paused immediately. "You okay, sailor?" he asked, his voice lower than the public persona, less showman, more man. Luke's lips parted. He wanted to respond, but nothing came out. His mouth moved before his voice followed, and then in barely a whisper, he said it. Something no one else heard. Trump blinked, the words cutting through the noise. His expression changed. It was subtle. His eyes narrowed slightly. His mouth opened, but no response came out. He stared at Luke as if trying to read the whole story just from his eyes. The president's demeanor dropped its usual edge. Confidence gave way to something else, a moment of human stillness. The nearby officers stiffened. Was this a protest? A confession? A threat? But Trump didn't recoil. He didn't move away. He stood still for several seconds, just him and Luke. One whisper. One unknown. Then Trump did something no one expected. He cleared his throat, looked around once, and said, "Come with me." Gasps rose from the media pen. Secret Service immediately repositioned, forming a discreet but solid circle around Trump and Luke. They stepped away from the line, heading toward a nearby hangar. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists tried to shout questions, but were held back. Inside the hangar was a smaller side room, typically reserved for debriefings and quick briefings. Now, it was quiet. dim. The walls bore framed photos of naval history, Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, the Gulf War. In one corner sat a table with a carafe of water, untouched. Trump closed the door behind them. "What did you say out there?" he asked again. No edge, no politics, just a question. Luke exhaled. It felt like the first full breath he'd taken in hours. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo, carefully unfolding it. "My father, Commander Nathan Harrison, he died in 2005, Navy vet, served 22 years. He made me promise something before he died." Trump leaned forward, nodding once. Luke's hand trembled slightly as he offered the photo. Trump took it and studied it carefully. "That's him," Luke said quietly. "And me, on the dock before his last deployment." Trump's eyes didn't leave the picture. "He told me," Luke continued, voice low and cracking, "if I ever met you, I had to salute you. Not because of politics, but because he believed you were going to bring dignity back to the service. Back to the country." Trump said nothing. His thumb brushed the edge of the photo. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. Luke wasn't talking to a president anymore. He was talking to a man. Luke stood still in the quiet room, the silence pressing against his chest like a weight. Across from him, the President of the United States sat with a photograph of his father, Commander Nathan Harrison, still in his hands. There were no staffers, no teleprompters, no sound bites to prepare. Just two men, separated by power, united by grief. Trump slowly rose from his chair, looking again at the face in the photo. "He'd be proud," he said simply. Luke didn't speak. His throat was tight. Every word would have cracked. "Follow me," Trump said. Luke obeyed, uncertain, heart pounding again. The president opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Secret Service agents flanked them immediately, forming a moving wall of protection. They walked quickly, quietly toward the main hangar stage. As they emerged into view, flashes from cameras erupted. The crowd had grown, naval officers, base personnel, reporters, even families stationed nearby. The band ended its third improvised march and stood at attention. The president climbed the steps to the podium, Luke trailing a few paces behind him, unsure of where to stand or even look. Trump reached the top and said his pre-written speech on the lectern. His eyes scanned the first line, then he folded the paper and placed it aside. Silence fell. The room sensed something had changed. "I came here today," Trump began, "to speak about defense budgets, operations, and strategic priorities." His voice was clear but softer than usual, focused. "But then I met a young man who reminded me why any of this matters." He gestured to his right. Luke, standing just off stage, visibly stiffened. This sailor, Petty Officer Luke Harrison, carried with him a wish. A final request from his father, Commander Nathan Harrison, a Navy man who served this nation for over 2 decades. Trump paused. There was a rustle of attention across the crowd. His father didn't get to see today. He didn't get to hear his son speak those words, but today I did. And it reminded me that patriotism isn't measured in headlines or medals. He looked directly at the crowd. Sometimes it's measured in a whisper. You could hear the collective inhale across the hangar. Luke stood frozen. Around him, some sailors straightened. Others blinked back emotion. Commander Harrison believed in this country even when he was dying. Trump continued. And he believed in the futures, in his son in the Navy, and yes, as in me. There was no arrogance in his tone. Just wait. I don't take that lightly. Today a promise was kept. A salute decades in the making was finally delivered. And that's more powerful than any applause. The audience was utterly still now. Trump's tone had shifted the air. He turned to Luke again. Your father would be proud, son. You carry more than his name. You carry his legacy. A ripple went through the audience. At the front row, an admiral removed his cap, placing it quietly over his heart. The gesture echoed across the formation. One by one, sailors followed. Luke's throat tightened again. He didn't feel like a hero, but somehow in this moment, he was standing not just for himself, but for every silent salute that had gone unseen. Trump leaned forward at the podium. Commander Harrison didn't live to see this day, he said, voice softening. But his words, passed on by his son, live on through all of us now. And to me, that's what patriotism is. Not loud words, but lasting ones. The applause started slowly. One officer clapped. Then another. And another. Soon the entire hangar echoed with genuine, grounded applause. It wasn't political. It was personal. Trump stepped away from the podium and motioned to Luke. Come with me. They left the stage and exited into another corridor. This time, they entered a ceremonial room lined with glass cases. Inside them, medals, honors, memorabilia from generations of military service. Trump walked to a tall cabinet. From a drawer inside, he removed a small velvet box. This medal isn't protocol, he said. It's personal. Luke looked at it, confused. Trump opened it. Inside was a replica Commander's Medal of Honor, specially engraved. Luke read the inscription. For legacy and loyalty. His breath caught. I can't accept this, Luke said, stunned. Yes, Trump replied. You can. Because sometimes the smallest salute carries the greatest weight. Luke reached out with shaking hands and took it. Thank you, sir, he said, eyes burning. For honoring him? Trump looked at him quietly. No, thank you. For reminding me why I served too. That evening, as the motorcade pulled away and the base returned to routine, Luke walked back to his barracks in a daze. He stepped inside, uniform still crisp, medal in hand. His roommates stopped cold. One dropped his phone. Dude, one of them said, you were just on every news channel in America. I didn't mean to be, Luke replied quietly. He walked to his side of the room and sat down. Carefully, he placed the medal beside his father's photo and the folded flag from the funeral. Another sailor leaned in. What did you whisper to him? Luke smiled faintly. Only what my father told me to. That night, Luke slept soundly. The first peaceful sleep since he was 16. The next morning, the world felt different. On base, people greeted him with respect. Not the kind you're ordered to give, but the kind earned through something deeper. In his locker was a plain envelope. The handwriting was instantly familiar. His mother opened it. Inside was a letter and another photograph, an old image of his father during deployment, sweat-drenched, sunburned, but smiling. The letter read, I saw the news. You did it. Your father would have cried just like you did. He always said you'd wear that uniform with more honor than he ever could. I wish he could have seen you yesterday. Luke blinked away tears. On the back of the envelope was a line hastily scribbled. Yes, there's something I never told you about your dad. He turned the letter over. He once turned down a promotion, a big one. He chose to stay home with us instead. He always wondered if that made him less of a patriot. Luke stared at the words. No, Mom, he whispered. It made him a better one. 2 days later, an older officer visited the base. Admiral Gaines, a retired vet with medals that gleamed even in the shade. I served with your dad in Bahrain, he said to Luke, voice cracking. He saved my life once. Luke was stunned. He never told me. He wouldn't. Your dad didn't talk about medals. He talked about values. Gaines handed Luke something wrapped in cloth, a worn leather notebook, creased with time. He kept this during deployment. It's yours now. Luke opened it that night. The first page read, Deployment, May 2004. If anything happens to me, I want Luke to know that being his dad has been my highest rank. Luke's breath caught. The next few pages were routine, missions, dates, complaints about coffee, but scattered between them were messages. Luke, remember, courage isn't loud. It's doing the right thing when no one's watching. Love your country, but love your people more. If you ever meet President Trump, look him in the eye and tell him why I believed in him. Because sometimes leaders forget who they serve. Luke wiped his eyes. He had done just that. He sat down and began to write. Not in the journal, in a letter. Dear Mr. President, thank you for hearing me. You didn't have to. Most wouldn't have, but you listened. And in doing so, you reminded me that even a whisper can carry the weight of a salute. He wrote about his father, about that final promise, about how fulfilling it gave him peace. This wasn't about politics. It was about promises. And now that it's fulfilled, I feel like my father's finally home. He sealed the envelope and addressed it to the White House. For Luke, it wasn't a letter. It was closure. 3 days after Luke mailed the letter, he received a call he never expected. It was early morning. The sky outside the barracks window was just turning pale gold. Luke had just laced up his boots when his phone vibrated. The screen showed an unknown number, Washington, D.C. He answered cautiously. Petty Officer Harrison? Said a professional voice. Please hold for the President of the United States. Luke froze, boots half-tied, heart thudding in his chest. Then after a pause, the familiar voice came through. Luke, it's Trump. Luke stood without realizing it, spine straightening instinctively. I read your letter, Trump continued, his tone quieter than before. And the copy of your father's journal that Admiral Gaines sent. Luke couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Trump went on. Your father was right. We remembered too late, and I want to change that. What do you mean, sir? Luke managed. I want to create something permanent. A memorial. For the ones like your father. The ones whose names never make the news, but whose service holds this country up. Luke's breath caught. And I want Commander Nathan Harrison's name to be the first one engraved. Luke was silent. Then softly, he'd be honored. Trump paused. No, he said. The honor's mine. That week, the White House made an announcement that stunned the press corps. President Trump stepped up to the podium in the briefing room. But instead of reading from the usual policy update or legislative summary, he held something unexpected in his hand. a worn, leather-bound journal. "We often celebrate the braves," he said, "but we forget the quiet ones." Reporters leaned in. "Today, I'm announcing the formation of the Silent Salute Memorial, a BAY, national monument dedicated to everyday military heroes, the ones who served without fame, the ones who gave without asking." Behind him, aides held up renderings of a marble wall, somber and beautiful, designed to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. It would not hold ranks or titles, only names etched in black stone. "The first name to be inscribed," Trump said, "will be Commander Nathan Harrison." Gasps filled the room. Watching on a small screen back at the base, Luke stared, hand resting over the metal in his locker. He reached for the photograph again, tracing the same edges he had 1,000 times before. This time his father's face felt closer, more alive, more seen. Months later, the inauguration of the Silent Salute Memorial took place under a steel blue sky in Arlington. Crowds gathered, families, veterans, sailors, even school children. Rows of seats were filled with people, holding flags and photographs of their loved ones. Some wore medals, others black veils. Trump arrived last, walking directly to Luke, who now wore his dress uniform again, neat, strong but visibly moved. They stood side by side as the curtain dropped from the wall. First name: Commander Nathan Harrison. The carving was bold, etched deep into black granite, standing forever in solemn grace. Trump spoke briefly. He wasn't a celebrity. He didn't stand in the spotlight, but he stood for this nation with unwavering strength. And because his son whispered a promise, we will never forget him. Luke saluted again, tears finally falling freely. But this time they weren't from pain. They were for every father, every quiet hero, every silent salute. Legacy isn't about being remembered by the world. It's about being remembered by one person and living worthy of that memory. In the weeks following the memorial unveiling, something unexpected began to happen. Luke's inbox filled daily with messages, emails, handwritten letters, folded notes slipped. Under his door, veterans, widows, children, all sharing their own versions of silent salutes. One note read, "My son always felt invisible after we lost his dad in Iraq. Your story gave him pride again. Thank you, Luke." Another said simply, "He wasn't a general. He was a cook, but he served 14 years. And your salute made me feel like someone finally saw him." Luke read every message. Not out of duty, out of kinship. He began to reply, one by one. Every letter answered, every story honored. He hadn't meant to start a movement, but perhaps that was his father's final gift. Not to make Luke a hero, but to make him a voice. He wasn't alone anymore. And neither were they. A year passed. At a graduation ceremony for a prestigious military academy, Luke stood on stage, not as a sailor, but as a guest speaker. The auditorium was filled with fresh uniforms, rows of salutes and dreams shaped by discipline. Luke stood tall before them and lifted the worn leather journal. "This belonged to my father," he said, "and it taught me that being remembered by history isn't the same as being remembered by someone who loved you." He held up the medal next. "Legacy is not medals or monuments. It's the echo of someone else's belief in you." The cadets rose in applause, but Luke didn't bask in it. He only looked skyward for a moment, then stepped down. As he exited the stage, a young woman approached, saluting smartly. "My dad served with yours," she said, eyes misty. "He talked about him all the time." Luke nodded. "Then we share a legacy." She smiled. "He would have been proud of both of you." Luke returned the salute, and for the first time, he was the one holding back tears. Years later, Luke sat on a bench near the Silent Salute Memorial, now a high-ranking officer himself. His uniform bore new ribbons, but his demeanor remained quiet, reflective. He came often, not out of ritual, but to listen. And sometimes, he heard things. A small boy approached the wall, holding his father's hand. He stared at the name etched into stone.